Afternoon. This is Chapter 13, Lecture B. We finished yesterday talking about a house divide or fruits of manifest destiny. We talked about yesterday ending with the opening of Japan and Matthew Perry. Not this Matthew Perry, if you're looking on the slide, not Chandler Bing Matthew Perry, but Matthew Perry, the Commodore, opened up Japan. Now, with this idea of moving west, this next thing is going to open up some problems, and this is why this next section is called A Dose of Arsenic. Victory over Mexico added more than 1 million square miles to the United States. Slavery dominated this new land and would be the focal point moving forward by a lot of people. Ralph Waldo Emerson stated, "It will be as the man who swallows arsenic, Mexico will poison us." And what he's getting at is, if you look at this period, is slavery had been kind of put to the side. We'd kind of avoided it a lot. Now it's going to come to the forefront, and it's going to be something that's going to be problematic. The Wilmot Proviso between 1846, issue of slavery had been settled by the Missouri Compromise. David Wilmot of Pennsylvania proposed a resolution prohibiting slavery from the new territory gained from Mexico. Party lines crumbled. Northerners voted for and helped it pass the House, failed in the Senate, though. And what you're going to see is the South's going to oppose the Wilmot Proviso for obvious reasons. In 1848, as a response, the Free Soil Party will be formed. Martin Van Buren and Charles Francis Adams, John Quincy Adams' son, will run for president. Amazing, they left the party ranks to do this. But the Free Soil Party is not going to gain much traction at this point. The Whig candidate that year will be Zachary Taylor. And he will be running on his success of the Mexican-American War. Zachary Taylor will become president. So the big thing you're going to see here is this arsenic, as Emerson talks about, is what's going to be done of slavery. Southerners supported Zachary Taylor because they thought he would be there, rallying support about it. I was just watching TV last night on Mysteries at the Museum, and they talked about the death of Zachary Taylor, who dies very early in his presidency. Some thought he might have been poisoned because Taylor will come out and speak against the expansion of slavery in the new territories, something that a lot of people are going to be surprised by. But in either case, you can see Southerners are now pushing at the national level to preserve slavery at all cost. Now, dose of arsenic 2. The Free Soil Appeal. Many in the North wanted to limit the South's power on the federal government, and they felt was dominated by Southern politics, especially when most of the population was in the North. And the only reason they could dominate the politics often was because of that 3/5 compromise with the slaves counting for population. The idea of preventing new slave states appealed to many in the North, and the ability to move to the Western territories held out the promise of economic betterment, and to keep slavery out of it would be beneficial for all. Free soil heavily meant free for white men and to advance his freedoms, not necessarily to blacks, but what this was looking at was a new place for whites to go and be free. And that also appealed to Southern poor whites that had been kind of entrenched in this feudalistic society in the South. The move to a free territory where there was no slavery, but opportunity for you to improve and be away from the rich plantation owners was very appealing. Free soil heavily meant, I already said that, Southerners viewed slavery needed to expand or die. Also, the balance of the government rested on the new states. So Southerners are going to take that drastic stance: slavery or die. If we don't expand slavery, we're going to die. Our way of life will be compromised, etc. So we're going to die on this hill, by God, and they're going to stick to that. So dose of arsenic 3, and that's going to lead to crisis and compromise. And I'm going to say compromise very loosely. In the year 1848, a year of uprising in Europe, there is, including places that would later become Germany, France, and others, there was a lot of upheaval of people fleeing Europe, Central Europe, and a lot of unrest there. And so that's going to trickle over to the United States. In 1850, California asked to be admitted to the Union as a free state. South did not want this, and the South's going to fight it, but there will be ultimately a compromise reached. California would enter as a free state. Slave trade, not slavery, would be abolished in Washington, D.C. So slavery would exist still in D.C., but buying and selling of slaves no longer. Stringent new fugitive slave law, where the Northerners agreed to enforce this very strict law. And the status of slavery in the remaining territories acquired from Mexico would be left to the decision of the local white inhabitants. U.S. agreed to pay off the massive debt of Texas in this as well. And so you're going to see some compromises reached here to get California admitted. But if you look at this, this is a Band-Aid. This is not dealing with the long-term solution. A dose of arsenic 4, the Great Debate. Debate raged on in Congress. Daniel Webster announced his willingness to abandon the Wilmos Proviso and accept New Fugitive Slave Law if this meant sectional peace. John C. Calhoun, too ill to speak, rejected all compromise and stated that the North must yield or the Union would not survive. So you get people like Webster who's willing to compromise, but then you get John C. Calhoun, the former vice president, who's going to stick to his guns and metaphorically stay on the hard-line stance that slavery or else. William Seward of New York also rejected compromise and called a higher law morality. So he's going to be a Northerner who's going to be the antagonist of John C. Calhoun. President Taylor was a nationalist. Congress just needed to add to California. He wanted to preserve the Union. Taylor died suddenly as an intestinal infection, and Fillmore supported Clay's compromises. And Taylor will leave office without really doing much of anything. But what you can see here is Taylor, like Jackson to some degree, and a lot of others, viewed the Union as supreme over any sectional preference. Though they might be inherently supportive of slavery, they wanted the Union to preserve at all costs. Dose of arsenic 5. Now the fugitive slave issue, strong law that allowed federal agents to override any local law enforcement and to return those slaves to their owners. Ironically, this violated the states' rights consistency that the South wanted, meaning the states would have control over this, and this new law, the federal government did. So this went against the states' rights position. Deep into sectional feuds, and Underground Railroad came back and forth. The railroad had kind of maybe not slipped backwards, but wasn't as prominent, but now it's going to be very prominent in full force, and you're going to have people really, really trying to get to Canada. Canada offered freedom. Now you couldn't just go to the north. You had to go all the way to Canada for ultimate freedom. Now, Douglas and popular sovereignty. Franklin Pierce won the election of 1852 by saying the Compromise of 1850 was the final statement of slavery. So Pierce is going to say that will become President Pierce in 52. The final issue on slavery is what was settled in 1850. Obviously, we know that is not going to work. Stephen Douglas in 1854 proposed creating two new territorial governments in Kansas and Nebraska to help build a transcontinental railroad. Now, economics and money and expansion are going to come to play here. So 1850 said each new territory would vote for their sovereignty over slavery. Though popular sovereignty would solve the problem in this Kansas-Nebraska area that will become territories, was dead wrong. And this is going to lead to the ultimate showdown with the Kansas-Nebraska Act along Missouri and Kansas border. This will be passed in 1854, repealed the Missouri Compromise, split the Democratic Party, the Whig Party will collapse, and this will be the emergence of a third party that we'll know as the Republican Party. Yes, the modern GOP will be born in this period. Now, on your paper, or on your reaction quiz for this week, for this chapter 13 that will be assigned to this as a paper, and we'll talk about Bleeding Kansas here in a little bit, that dives into this Kansas-Nebraska problem and the issues that will come along the border. And as you read it, you're going to see that, yes, slavery is the root cause of it, but the issues along Missouri, Kansas, and even territorial expansion was much more deeper than slavery. Slavery was the big descriptive that would say everything was the problem, but the reality is the problems that were plaguing the West and the borders areas right there, it was nothing new. It was all territorial land, greed, power, position, stuff that gets intertwined in with the whole slavery debate, and people are going to use that as the big excuse to get what they want. Now, a dose of arsenic 4 or 6 right there, and then moving on to the rise of the Republican Party. The Northern economy, 1843 to 1857, saw explosive economic growth caused by the railroad network. Immigration exploded as well, shifted trade from the northwest, from the south to the east. Emerging coal, iron, and manufacturing jobs in the north. The northern economy is going to start to boom because it's going to modernize. The rise and fall of the Know-Nothingers. Nativism became a national movement in 1854. You're going to have people that are nativism is this preference for native born. The Know-Nothing Party was mostly anti-Catholic. Little came of the movement in stopping mass immigration or stopping them, but the Know-Nothingers will have a moment in history. And honestly, The know-nothingers, or the nativists, are going to periodically come back in American history, and you've seen the resurgence of them even in the past few years over the whole immigration debate. Now, the free labor ideology, the rise of the Republican Party too. By 1856, Republican Party emerged as the next major party against the Democrats. Combined several other groups like Whigs, the Free Soils, and etc. The North offered freedom of any laborer to move up in the status of landowning farmer or independent craftsman. Slavery, by contrast, was spawned by an order consisting of degraded slaves, poor whites with no hope of advancement, and idle aristocrats, meaning the feudal society in the South was very rigid. Only a few were in the top echelon. Where the North offered a movement of freedom, you could work your way up, be as rich as you could make yourself, or as poor as you wanted to make yourself. Thus it couldn't spread, not really attacking it where it already existed. They didn't care about slavery necessarily in the southern states. They just wanted to stop its expansion. Now this leads me to the point of Bleeding Kansas, the election of 1856, which is a very, very important moment. In 1854 and 1855, pro-slavery Missourians crossed the border and voted in Kansas to vote in their territorial government. Out of a registry of about 2,000 eligible voters in Kansas, 6,000 some people voted. So you can see the voter fraud and problems there. Now this pro-slavery government that we quickly recognized by the President Pierce as the official government obviously was not representative of the people of Kansas. The Free Soil set up a rival government. It's called the Lecompton, or the Lecompton will be the initial government. Topeka, it will emerge as a rival area, and that's where they'll have two competing governments for a couple years. A few years with some severe skirmishes. The book says 200 people lost their lives, much lower in reality, and I think the paper that is along with Chapter 13 puts the death of the Bleeding Kansas at 56. And honestly, that is 56 that you could say are directly contributed to slavery. There is more deaths, but as you will study, and as I did extensive research for my master's, a lot of the deaths are literally unrelated to the slavery thing. It's just deaths in the area. Now, Preston Brooks beat Charles Sumner unconscious in the halls of Congress during this period. And John C. Fremont was the Republicans' first candidate, though he'll lose to James Buchanan in 1856. So what you see is a dramatic shift politically now starting to happen. Northerners are much more open to change. Southerners are going to entrench and dig their claws in. And where they're going to see slavery's question is going to be in the West with new territories. Well, started of California really. I mean, you go back all the way back to Missouri in 1820. Or 1821, but now you're starting to see the problem of California. You had the problem of Texas. Now you're going to start to see Kansas, Nebraska that are being picked up as states now, or territories that will want to become states. The issue at hand is not being resolved. So today, as you can see, there's a lot of emerging issues happening. And Bleeding Kansas, like we talk hours about John Brown, who actually makes his initial history here at Bleeding Kansas with the Pottawatomie Massacre. You're seeing a very, very dramatic shift in the country now. And that's where we're going to get to the emergence of Lincoln in the next part, and the final part of this, and the impending crisis leading right up to the doorstep of the Civil War.